meeting to order. Roll call is Skidmore, Zellers, and Kemble are here, and I will take a motion on approval of the minutes that were electronically sent to us.
So moved.
Paul, we're counting on you for the second, because I can't second. Okay. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, those are passed. There's no one here from the public. Any disclosures or recusals? Seeing none, moving on to new business, finalization of city agency survey. So we finalized the survey part, and Heather got it up on Survey Monkey early last week. Also last week, I met with the mayor, and he has decided that he wants to move along parallel tracks with this task force. And he convened a work group of Vic, Paul Kronberger, Enos, Greg McManners, and David Dreyer. Number one, they're going to review our survey. And you're meeting tomorrow, is that right?
Tomorrow's the first meeting, yes.
Tomorrow, and I think I was just at the council leadership meeting with the mayor and Enos said you'll review the survey and get it back to us. So I agreed with the mayor that we would hold off on sending it until we got the comments from his work group. His work group is more expansive, is going to look at issues of privacy in general, not just purchase and use of surveillance equipment. So they're going to be looking at issues of how even members of the public could access city data in order to stalk people. So much more broad ranging than our work group is writing policy about. But in my meeting with him, we agreed that he's like, yeah, you know, continue doing what you're doing. The only thing I want is for my people to look at your survey, and then you just go and write your policy. That's what you're supposed to do. So that's why there's a slight delay. So if you do have any comments, editorial comments on the cover letter or the survey itself, as it is in Survey Monkey, now is the time for us to talk about it.
I've got some very minor suggestions. Should I just go through them?
Yeah, let me pull up the document.
Which document are you?
The cover letter
referring to?
she has.
I'm starting on the cover letter. Tell
And
me
are
when you're
you
ready?
Are you talking about, just to check? Are you which?
It'll be clear. Okay. So the cover letter. Start with the cover letter.
Okay, are you looking at the document?
The
So
cover
you can.
letter.
Well, my question was about which version of the cover letters.
The most recent one that you sent out as the final.
Well, because Rebecca Kemble and I had been iterating on that. So you have updated the cover letter even beyond what I've seen, right? I think you did last week.
I think I just made reference to the changes. We made some changes in the survey on Survey Monkey, so not the Word doc, but on Survey Monkey.
This is the most recent the most recent document that you sent out, Heather, is
Right.
what
To
I'm
us.
working from.
Okay, so we will go
Yeah.
back to that.
I think when we say President's Work Group, we should say Common Council President's Work Group, to be clear to the public who we're talking about. And so that's in the first paragraph. And then in the penultimate paragraph, the first two sentences are rather duplicative, so I would suggest taking out the first sentence and simply say then, the work group has been informed that certain equipment and data is sensitive.
You said the second to last paragraph.
So
Okay,
just
so
delete
just take
the
out the
first
presidents
sentence
in the second.
And then in the second sentence, take out the word presidents because we defined it in that first paragraph as work group.
Yeah.
So it should just say, that paragraph it should start out, the work group has been informed that certain equipment.
Okay.
And then for Alder Kimball's title, Chair, Common Council, President's Work Group.
Yep.
Okay. That's all. I mean, pretty minor things. And then when you go to the survey on the first page at the top, Common Council President's Work Group. And then the third paragraph, the same change that I already mentioned for that. And that's it. Oh, and then at the very end, thank you for participating in this survey from the Common Council President's Work Group.
Okay, and on SurveyMonkey, I'm not sure that everyone went back and looked at all the comments and the edits. Did you see the survey in SurveyMonkey? Did you?
I saw it but didn't realize that this was different from that.
But I see you have a hard copy of the survey.
Right.
There was a substantial change made in question 13, I believe it was. That is not, what does question 13 there say?
Question 13 says, where is the data collected from
Oh,
this
that's
technology
completely
stored?
different. Okay, so that one you have there is obsolete. But there was a question about, does your agency have access to other agencies' cameras? And we added
I mean, this
others.
is what is linked on the agenda.
Oh, it is,
It's
on
actually-
today's agenda?
It's
There's
linked,
two versions.
right, there's two links.
Right, this is the second one that was supposedly final, as I understood it. But, you know, maybe I'm misinterpreting.
It has been put into SurveyMonkey, which changed it a little bit, and because we broke it into two parts in that process, so some of the numbering is different. There's minor wording changes that happened in that process.
And so are those linked here to the agenda?
No, they're not, in part because I'm not quite sure how to, it's not, their work group is looking at the online survey. I did send the draft of the online survey around to the members of this group for comment, and I incorporated those comments last week, and then they have the current version of the online survey that they're looking at. We can still amend it, certainly, but it is not in Legistar because it's a moving target right now, if that makes any sense. And also, I'm not sure how we put a SurveyMonkey in Legistar, honestly.
Other than printing it out and PDFing it.
Yes, we could do
Yeah.
that, but
Which it seems to me we should have the most current copy linked to our agenda. Because it's confusing not only to members, at least me, but to the public then, wouldn't have access.
Because they don't
to-
have the password and all that
Right,
to get into
right.
the
So we should
SurveyMonkey.
have, seems to me, the most current version that we should be working from here linked.
So maybe for the minutes, could you figure out how to take PDFs of the, I don't know, screenshots or something? Do you know how to do that? IT guy?
Do you have Adobe?
yeah, I can do it. I hadn't anticipated comments because I knew it had gone to the work group, so I wasn't aware that we
Mhm.
would be amending it at this meeting, but I can certainly add a PDF image of the survey as it stands, but, you
Yeah.
know, it'll just be version 3. It's not gonna be the ultimate version, I'm sure.
Right, right.
But at least for, to have that in the minutes, at least, that'd be good. So someone going back in time looking at it. Okay. Paul, do you have any comments on the letter or the survey? You good with them? Okay. All right. Moving on. Yeah, yeah. So they're meeting tomorrow, and they'll get, Enos said he'll get back to me with their feedback on the survey, if any, tomorrow afternoon, so at our next meeting, we can finalize it and decide what we want to do with that feedback and get it out. Which still gives city departments about 2 months to work with it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, item 6, surveillance technology presentation from Herb King.
So, I'm going to
The
give a
lights.
presentation based on how IT, on the type of data collection that we do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the data that we actually capture. I want to show you what some of that data looks like, and then I want to show you basically some dashboards that we create from that data. All right, types of data captured. So the technology that's used to generate these logs actually come from the devices themselves. These would be the servers, the workstation, the network appliances, and most network-attached devices. And we basically take all those logs and consolidate them into a tool like Excel and create charts and graphs from that. And so of the data types that we mainly capture, they're called syslog, and then there's logs that we capture from Microsoft Windows, and then there's logs we capture from our network security devices, and then we also capture logs from our applications.
Are you talking just generally data, or are you talking specifically surveillance data?
So this would be data that would be construed as surveillance data.
Okay, could you list some of the, or are you going to get to that?
List some of the, so some of the data types that we collect are right here, the syslog, the Microsoft Windows, that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, Microsoft Windows isn't of itself surveillance, so how are you relating this
So
to
we
surveillance?
take those logs and we put them into an Excel spreadsheet.
Those
No.
logs,
The logs from, I'm sorry.
You
We
have to
take the Microsoft logs and we put
Of-
them into,
logs of what?
Help us understand what a log
In other
is.
words, you're monitoring our activities.
yes, your Windows, your desktop activities. So this would be like logons, failures, logons, successes, accessing specific resources that are out on the computer network.
And you consider that to be surveillance based on the definition that we have of surveillance?
I believe so. That's
I
what
think
it
it
seems
is,
to,
yeah.
I think it seems to fit within that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's the type of surveillance that IT does. It's different than like the cameras, where you're actually looking at a picture or something like that, whereas this is not that type of surveillance. So if you look at the definition there, it does talk about any device that generates and collects logs. That's what this would fall under.
Okay.
So every device that we have, your laptop, the network equipment, all generate different types of logs. So those would be like a system log. Those would be your Microsoft Windows logs that come from your desktop, or the servers that hold the resources. It would also come from like our security appliances, such as our antivirus servers or our email filtering servers. So those generate a lot of information.
Okay, thank you.
And please, if there's any questions, just, shout them out. So of the first type of log that we collect is called a syslog. And this log is created by mainly our firewalls, routers, switches. It's used to monitor and trend computer traffic. So that way we can monitor the traffic patterns and detect any type of unauthorized traffic that may be coming into or attempting to come into the city network, or part of the data loss prevention, where we would want to see if there was a lot of data going out of the city network. We'd be able to track it with these type of logs. So what I have here up on the screen is basically an exact excerpt of one of those system logs. And if you look at it, you basically have your timestamp and the type of log it is that the type of log that's there. In this instance, it is a performance log that's basically notifying us that 96% of the disk space available on the machine is utilized at 96%.
Wow.
So when we talk about the surveillance and the logs, we actually use this information to monitor the performance of the environment. So that would be like disk space, the processor utilization, the memory utilization, and the network utilization. So the next type of log that we capture are those ones that we kind of just briefly discussed, which are the Microsoft Windows logs, which come from the desktop and the servers. And we use that to monitor successful, unsuccessful login attempts. We monitor the file system access. So what that means is basically when you go out to your network share or your home directory, there's an alert that says, yeah, you know, or the system, and this is built in, where it'll say user A access this resource or this share, and they were granted access because they belong in this group. And then if we have someone that tries to access something that they don't have access, it'll say denied. And so we'll get that. So then we'll take, like I said, take that information, put it into Excel, you know, generate some reports, so that way we can follow up on there if we notice that it's continuously happening, or that there's a large count of those types of attempts that are failing.
So when do you look at those reports and pull those reports?
Usually we monitor it proactively. A lot of the times when you have logs like this, you get a lot of false positives. When there is no malicious activity, it could just be a user putting in the wrong password, or clicking on a printer that they don't have access to. So it's just usually normal behavior. So we have to kind of weed those out. We also monitor those whenever we get requests for it. So if someone says, hey, I want to know if so-and-so is accessing this information. So we respond to those separate requests. And then we also use that for compliance. So with a lot of the criminal justice side, we have to show that we have the ability to monitor successful logins and log-offs. So the third type of information that we capture comes from our network security logs. And these devices are basically going to be like our antivirus appliance, or our email filtering system, or our content filtering, like a web filter, that are used to, and these are devices that are specifically put in place as countermeasure or controls to either prevent or control access to specific resources on the network. So in this case, so our anti-spam filter basically looks at all the emails, it does some comparison to validate that email before it comes in and gets put into the end user's mailbox. And so in this example, what we have is basically that type of log here, and these logs usually have a lot of information. So it'll actually have up there what I underlined, it'll have like the server name, it'll have the workstation name, it'll also include the domain that the user is attempting to connect to, it'll actually have the username, and it'll give us, in this case, it's a notification that a malware was deleted. And these are pretty common because usually whenever you go to like a Google web page or any kind of web page out there, they all have advertisements. And a lot of those advertisements have little scripts built into it to either do location tracking or some information gathering on the part of whomever owns that website. And so what we have here is basically a log saying, hey, I noticed this, it's not allowed, or it's not allowed, but it's a Trojan, or it's a virus, or it's malware. I went ahead and deleted it. So what we do with these logs is we'll take a subset of them just to see how much malware that we may be attracting or potentially getting hit with across the city on the desktops.
Does that include tracking cookies?
I'm sorry?
Tracking cookies?
It could. Some cookies are malicious, and some, depending on the device itself, it has the ability to monitor and track malicious cookies.
Okay,
So-
I've got the ability, on my personal emails, to block cookies
Yep.
totally. And that kind of cuts out a whole bunch of,
So cookies are used for so many different things. A lot of the times, you have to accept a cookie to be able to use a specific website. So even if you block it, it'll prevent you from doing something on that website. Cookies are also used for basically to cache your credentials, so that way you wouldn't have to re-enter your information into that website. Also, cookies are put on your workstation or within your browser cache as a third party to collect more information from you. So a lot of those capabilities are built into your browser's configuration settings.
I understand that, and I've always felt that that was a way of somebody keeping an eye on me. Like my bank has cookies, so if I do online banking, there's a certain amount of information that's out there.
Correct,
So-
and you're right. The technology, at least the way I understand it, is that the cookies are becoming better encrypted so that it doesn't contain clear text messages. So those cookies are managed completely by the provider of that website. So that has nothing that we can do from the city's point of view to manage those cookies. The fourth type of log that we capture are going to be applications. And what I have here in the example here is basically a SQL Server log that kind of shows where a user attempted to log into the SQL Server database. They were denied, and it gave you the reason. Basically, it says token-based server access violation failed with infrastructure error. So that basically is just another of those failed logons trying to access a resource on a SQL Server.
That the person was not authorized to access?
They weren't set up with the correct security permissions to be able to access the resources on that SQL Server in this example.
Okay.
Can you define SQL Server for people who are watching this?
Sure, so SQL Server is basically a database repository of information. If you think of Excel on steroids with a little bit more capabilities.
Mhm.
So on this next slide, I wanted to kind of show you some of the graphs we've developed with more information. So up here on the left, you can kind of see where we kind of trend, where we're getting some instances of malware detection. Over to the right of that same column, it kind of has a list of the type of that malware. In this case, these are all browser-based, and they were all deleted. So it's pretty common to see that. On the bottom graph down here, we have basically where we use the logs that contain performance information. If we ever want to be able to trend the performance over time, we use this type of chart. In this example, it's charting the utilization of a server's memory or RAM over the course of 1 hour. So you can use that to kind of correlate with any kind of performance problems, or if you need to actually increase capacity on the server.
So this dashboard report does not link to individual users, if I'm understanding correctly?
No, it's linked to the computers.
Okay, so this would not, I think, fall into our surveillance definition.
And over here on the
Well,
bottom.
but it's linked to users use the machines.
Yes, so the
And
user
so the
uses-
way they use the logs.
So
of the
if you go back
machines
to the,
might-
back to the source data, you're saying, where,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're correct. So
Yeah.
the computer isn't just going to go out and browse
Correct.
itself.
Right.
So they'll actually have a person sit behind that would actually be manipulating that.
So this
So-
is cumulative, essentially.
It can be cumulative, but a lot of these, there's so many logs, there's no way to keep them all. So
Yeah.
there's, depending on the log, it could be from, I don't know, 15 days to 1 day. So it just really depends. On the bottom right-hand side, we have a chart that we kind of developed using Excel to kind of show a list of potential malware activists that may be trying to attempt to look at some of our, or attempt to breach our firewalls. So what we do is you kind of want to say, hey, who is the biggest person out there within this time frame that's really trying to come into the city, or vice versa. So this is an example of how we can take those logs, put them into Excel, and create these charts.
So on the previous slide, application login, do you only flag or you keep track?
I'm sorry?
On this one, do you only flag or stop people from having access, or do you track this? So say, for example, if I'm attempting to go to a certain site or certain data point
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not allowed to access, do you just stop me, or you track that to an extent?
Oh,
that if-
it'll stop you because,
Right, it will
yeah.
stop me, but are you tracking it to an extent that if I'm making a habit to go there just to try to cause trouble or something, do you at some point be able to send me something to say you are not allowed to use this and therefore you should stop?
Yes, we would use those logs for that.
Okay.
So that concludes my part of the presentation. I believe Vic will kind of show us the demo part with the cameras.
Mhm.
So-
All right, so I'll just give a quick overview of the camera system. Will clarify, I'm not an expert on this. I've certainly used it, so I have the broad strokes, but there's likely to be some questions that I don't have answers to. So what you see here is just one of the cameras on the city enterprise system. This is live. This is Mineral Point and Gammon Road. You can see that right now I'm not touching it, so this is sort of a default direction that it's pointed. Most of the cameras, I should say all the traffic cameras out there all have sort of a resting point. Some of the cameras are pan, tilt, zoom so that they can be maneuvered, and I'll show that in a second, and zoomed. Some are just stationary. They just point one direction and have one field of vision, and that's all that they show. And this one is kind of a unique one I've discovered for whatever
So
reason.
are these the ones that the general public can access?
Yes, and so this, if you go to the city website, or a link from the city website, there are a number of the traffic cameras that are visible. As you can see, the public gets sort of a degraded version of it, so it's not a live feed, it's much fewer frames per second, and the resolution is not as high. So it's easy to, this is one of the pan, tilt, zoom cameras, so this one can be moved around to give a different field of vision. Pretty much, depending on what the mount is, you can pretty much see 360 degrees in most cases. And this one also has zoom, so it's possible. This is to zoom in on something. And this one is, I think, one of the newer ones because it's got a pretty good zoom capability on it. So now, everything I'm doing here, there'll be a little delay, and you can see will show
Yeah,
up on the
public
public's.
Is just looking at a bunch of garbage in the
So
weeds.
so now if I just walk away and just leave this here, after a certain time delay, this will revert back to sort of that default viewpoint. So
And-
fortunately, it won't just stay on the trees.
And the footage from these are being retained for, what did we say? 3
14
months?
days.
14 days, sorry,
And I'll
thank you.
I'll show that, the recording here in a second,
Okay,
and how to
thank
get
you.
at that. But so this, so it won't stick to this one position. If someone has it open and forgets to put it back, it'll revert back. Now, there is a fair amount of variation in these cameras.
Variation meaning?
Just, I think, in age and quality. So this is this is Fish Hatchery Road and Badger Road, and you can see the resolution is not as good, and it's I haven't zoomed with it much, but so this just, you're not gonna have the same quality with some as with others, and I think that's just a factor of how long ago they were installed. So in terms of just manipulation, that's about it. It's, most of them are pan-tilt zoom, a few aren't, and then this is sort of what you see. Now, we have the capability to go back historically and look at some of the previously recorded. I'm sorry.
Could you go to one live that's in a residential district, like, say, Langdon, Henry?
Let me. I Pocket Badger's kind of
Sherman and Aber would be one.
yeah, I just,
Sherman and
There we
Aber,
go.
yeah. There's houses around there.
You know, I would like to see the
Yeah, there's a
Langdon and
part in-
Henry, because I
oh.
know those are high-res.
one of the.
So, yeah, if you could go to the downtown, you know, like
Those are probably
Langdon.
police cameras, not traffic cameras.
Are
I mean, one
these
of the-
only traffic cameras that you've got
He's showing
here?
us the public view.
Oh, just the
traffic.
public view ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
'cause,
So it's
I mean,
just traffic ones here?
You know,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
there's 900 plus cameras on here, and I have access to a lot of them on here, but I know there's some variation in agencies and what they do and don't want
Yeah.
out there for locations, so I
So
don't.
these are just the public ones? Is that what
These,
you're
I
saying?
think, these are just, I think they're just the public ones here. I will say that it's, there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to how these cameras are sorted over on the left here, and it can be maddening when you're trying
Yes,
to look
I
through it in a
think
hurry.
so.
So it's
Yeah.
not alphabetical, it's not geographic, it's seemingly
It's just there.
random
Random.
somehow. So it's hard to find the ones you're looking for sometimes.
That would be really frustrating.
But, so this is a,
Yeah, there's apartments there
Mhm.
so on this,
on Gilman Street.
Yeah, it's just that some of them are really high resolution.
so this one has a,
Yeah, very good, okay. Thank you.
so if we go, this is just the way you would look at a historical recording of it, if you wanted to do it. You basically put in your time range down here, hit search, and it's gonna download it and allow us to look at sort of the recorded version down here. Some of the cameras, I think, are on motion sensors, so they're not recording constantly, because sometimes if you look at this little bar here, you'll see little blanks. And this one I don't think is, but some of the traffic ones I've noticed that when we look at them overnight, they're not recording for big spaces, so they must be triggered by a car.
So is the resolution on the recorded history information the same resolution that you get when you're looking at it live?
Well, you're stuck with whatever direction, however it was situated.
Right, I understand that. You only get the view where the camera's pointing. But what I'm asking is the resolution the same on the stored as it is when you're looking at it live?
I don't know the answer to
There
that
may be
question.
one generation different, so
Yeah.
anytime you save something, it goes down.
It
five
degrades a bit.
generations.
It's going to
Okay.
be somewhat degraded.
Okay, thank you. And is it, my guess is it's not, but is it possible to do any kind of zoom on the recorded?
Well, I'm trying to do it right now, and it's not letting me. That's not to say that it's not possible, because I'm sure that with some analysis, I mean, we have other ways that we could do that. I don't know if there's a way to do that natively in this application like there is when you're looking at it live. And I don't know what
I think you can.
the quality of that is.
You could probably zoom into it, but it's not going to be like zooming it in when you're manipulating the camera, because it's actually recording the zooming when he's moving around there. But since he's not zooming on the recorded part, it's not going to be as clear as
Right.
it is where he's doing it
Right.
and it's getting recorded. So it won't be as clear.
And so this one is kind of a weird one, I've noticed, because it seems to, it has several presets that it just bounces between. And some of them are like that, and that's another maddening aspect when you're looking at a historical thing and waiting for a car to turn right, and then it zooms away to the other piece of the intersection right at the critical time. But so.
So if there has been a crime here, and you want to, maybe you know that this car is involved, then in some cases you can't then follow it because it's bouncing around, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, some of the cameras, like this one, is one of the only ones I know that has multiple presets that it sort of rotates through. Most of them have the fixed,
Mhm.
which they set it up as best as possible to get the whole intersection, but sometimes you can't, it doesn't give you the view that you want.
Okay.
And so if we go back more than 14 days here and do search, then we're beyond the 14 days, so there's nothing left in the system to see. And it's, there's a way to, and I noticed this one too, is this camera had some malfunction a week ago that had to get remedied, which it finally did. So it's not uncommon that we would look at these cameras historically for a crime that's been committed, for a traffic accident that happened in one of these intersections, and occasionally we would look at them live for large events, or if we're looking for something specifically when a crime just happened. It's not unusual for something to happen and then someone in the station to pull it up on the camera if they recognize it's a location that's covered, and they can give sort of live information to officers before they even arrive on the scene. And that,
Vic, who all has access?
well, in MPD, it's all sworn personnel. So anybody who's commissioned has access to this application, and that's, I think, tied to their user login. So there isn't a unique login to this application. Once you log into the city network, then
So there's no way to know who has looked at what cameras? Or who has looked at the cameras, period?
well, that I don't know. We don't have that capability. I don't know if there's a way that IT can
I'd have to
pull that.
look into it.
Could you please?
Sure.
Wouldn't that be in one of the logs?
It depends. It really depends.
Okay, well, I think that's an important question to know the answer to.
So you want to know if we're able to tell who has access a camera within this system.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who has accessed it and whether you can tell which cameras. Thank you.
But are you also not asking who access? I mean, having access is one thing, but
No,
access.
who has
Who
accessed?
has actually done it?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying, I can have access, but I may not have done it.
Right,
So,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So
But
there
you
are
want to
two-
know if they
Yeah.
actually accessed a specific camera within the system.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Whether
it
they
sounds like-
have actually gone and accessed the cameras, that whole thing.
Right.
Yep.
And whether you can tell which specific cameras they have.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
To kind of forward on that, question for IT is, do you keep a log of who logs in and looks at stuff? And if not, can you create a log? Maybe that's a logical question.
Yep, I can answer that one.
Can I just jump in really quick? Folks aren't really using their mics, and it would be really helpful for the recorded video of this. if
Thank you.
I'll get that information for you by the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Who has authorization to move the cameras? I know one who does, but,
Like, when you say authorization to move the cameras, what does
yeah,
that
like
mean?
Vic is moving the camera from one spot to another, positioning the camera. Who has, I would assume that not everybody can move any camera in the city of Madison around.
Yeah, I
When
think,
you have access, you can move.
yeah.
I know that we do have, when we have an event, like a protest or something where we are definitely going to use it in a command post, the commanders will usually put out an email internally and say, don't touch the cameras because we're using them. Because I think, at least for our level of access, anybody can move them.
I did not know that. So that anybody, any user can direct where that camera is looking and pan or do whatever.
And I don't know if that's all agencies or
I'm not
just
saying that they
MPD.
would do that, but I mean, they have that ability. Is that correct?
Yes, and as I mentioned, that's just, it'll revert back to its default spot after, I don't know, a minute or so.
All of them will, or just those traffic cameras?
Everyone has, as far as I know, everyone I've ever seen or used has a default position, and after some delay, it'll go back to that. So whatever you've moved it to or zoomed it to, it's gonna go back to that spot. And I'm not sure what the delay is. It's not very long before it'll go back, a couple minutes at the most, I think. And that's really it. We have the capability, I should say, our forensics unit can extract video from here if there's something that's evidentiary that we need to keep. I don't know how they do that, and then that would go into onto our evidence server, so it would be stored in a different way than the 14-day sort of overwrite system that the rest of the cameras have. That's about it.
So this is just one small subset of cameras that traffic engineering use, well, multiple agencies use, but mostly they're traffic engineering cameras. Can you say, and you made reference to some departments don't really want it known where their cameras are, but can you say, or maybe that's for you to say, which are the other departments that have their own cameras? And then there's a whole other enterprise system view of this website that you can look at that has those cameras. Can you tell us what those departments are?
I wasn't prepared to bring that, so I don't have that information with me today, but I can find out how to get that information.
I mean,
Okay.
I mean, we know.
I mean, I
we-
thought
we-
you guys were gonna present the whole enterprise system, not just the traffic cameras today.
I'm not following, I'm sorry.
So when we had this on our agenda, I thought there was gonna be a presentation on the whole system, citywide, the enterprise system of all of the cameras.
So I think this is a subset of the capabilities of the enterprise system. I think there's some sensitivity because there are agencies that don't want their locations known. And since I'm not the owner of those cameras, I can't give you the locations of those cameras.
But can you say the agencies?
Yeah, but I don't know the agencies off the top of my head,
Oh,
is what I'm trying to
okay.
say. I don't have that information in front of me, but I do have that information, that do have cameras, yes.
I mean, just a sort of a generic overview, I mean, certainly, there's a number of agencies that have internal cameras, you know, like we have them in our lobbies and things like that, or our parking lots, and there's a number of agencies, I think, that have that. And then, I think I talked a little bit about sort of the confusion about the ownership piece, because these are, I think, owned by traffic engineering, but there's a bunch of them that are indistinguishable from these in terms of their traffic cameras at intersections, but they're considered owned by MPD. And that's just a historical matter of what budget they came out of. They're not controlled any differently. It's very odd how that's set up. But so I mean, certainly the cameras that we have we're not the ones like this are fair game. We're not trying to hide them, or the locations or anything. And in fact, we've released them already to the newspaper a few months ago as part of a records request. So, and I suspect there's some that I don't have access to on here that I can't see citywide.
So how many cameras are on the enterprise system?
Upwards of 900.
I think, well, hopefully we'll get all that information. But I think that we have learned that Metro are not on the enterprise system, is that correct?
I believe they have a subset of
They have cameras on their buses
Mhm.
that are not on the enterprise
Enterprise
system.
system.
But there are cameras at the transfer points that are on the enterprise system.
On the enterprise system, okay, okay.
And I'm not aware, I don't know if they have any others beside those two, but the bus ones are not.
Okay, and so all of the police cameras, though, that are on the streets to monitor and help with crime resolution, all of those are on the enterprise system?
With the exception of temporary cameras that are used for a limited duration as part of a specific investigation, yes, they're all on the enterprise system.
And are most of them, some of them, none of them, able to essentially see when it's dark out? Or is that dependent upon the ambient light or street lights or whatever?
It varies somewhat, I think, based on just the camera. You know, there's some of
The
these have been
quality of
out
the
there.
camera, you mean?
Yeah, and how long it's been there. I'll see if I can. So this is maybe not a great example because it's a pretty well lit intersection anyway. And you see, this is one that I think is on some kind of motion detector, because you can see there's a lot of dead space.
Could try Johnson in Wisconsin. Okay.
Oh, there's others. Were you asking about some kind of special, like,
I just wanted to know what the-
infrared technology?
Well, yeah, what the capability really is for these.
But it's really what the seeing eye would see. These aren't like special night vision cameras or anything. They're just
No.
what the seeing, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other camera questions?
No? Okay. Thanks. So you should have item number 7, surveillance policy outline. You should have at your desk something Heather handed out, a handout. We asked her to give us some draft language
Can I get one of those?
for the first part
Can I get a copy?
of that outline that we
Thanks.
approved of at our last meeting. And it looks like she has fleshed some out. I kind of want to see this side by side with the outline itself, so I'm just going to take a minute and pull that up on my own computer.
I have some questions and comments.
Heather, is this the same one that was on Legistar?
Yes, I added it to Legistar this afternoon. Yes.
Okay. So Liddell, you want to kick it off?
Okay. I happened to stop by the council office, so I got a copy of it from Heather and had a little break between meetings, so have taken a look at it. So thank you very much, Heather, for putting this together. I have some comments that are more, minor editorial, which I don't know that this is the appropriate place to talk about those, but ones that are a little bit more substantive. On page 5, it seems like quite a bit of that, Heather, is repetitive. So the surveillance use policy.
Actually, if I could stop you there.
Yes,
On
okay.
page 5, that is not yet done.
Okay.
So I have only worked through page 4.
Okay, that makes
So-
sense then.
And the difference is the bullets versus the numbers and letters. So you'll see if it's bullets on page 5 and before it's numbers and letters. So the proper outline part that you have before you, I have thought about. I have not yet thought about the next part.
Okay, very good. So, because it did seem like that the first 4 pages were,
Yep.
Pretty good, and then
because due to time limitations, both at this meeting and before this meeting, I think it'll take us plenty of time to get through the first 4 pages.
okay.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
Then, just in the first 4 pages, then, again, I won't do the more minor editorial things, but on page 2, under 3.3, it says approved by the board. Was that something that was just pulled from elsewhere, or did you have something in mind?
I meant
there?
to say council there.
Okay. Then, just a question, what's a parking ticket device? And maybe we talked about that before. That's under surveillance technology that does not include the following devices. That's right at the top of page 2. It's under B.
Right, that is our adopted and adapted definition
From
that's-
ACLU.
Well, it's modified from ACLU. That's the Nashville definition. The ACLU is really, really, really close, but
Close,
the one you
okay.
have before you is the Nashville one. I think we had decided previously not to dig in too deeply to some of the elements of this, but if you want to, we can go into the definition.
What's the question?
I wanted to know what a parking ticket device is. The other things that are listed, I pretty much know what they are, but that one is not
It's a
something.
new technology, from what I understand. I think parking enforcement is changing, and the handheld ticket devices that we have now also have a wealth of information about the background of the vehicle. They know if it's stolen, what the history is it a scofflaw, all sorts of things, so that when when they enter information into it, you don't have to call in. It has all of that information. It's like a powerful tool. That's the way I understood it.
So maybe we could check with, like Sabrina, or, to find out.
Oh, that's PD.
What is-
Or
PD does
Sabrina in traffic
enforcement.
engineering?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would
Who
be
would
PD
handle
then.
that in PD?
Well, I mean, I think it's another example of where we have to be careful with this definition, because
Right.
certainly there are handheld ticket writing devices that we use and have used for years, and that could be what that speaks to. We have the auto chalk system, which sort of does the automated 2-hour enforcement, but collects license plates to do that, and so does that fall under that? So that's, I think, one
Well,
of
the
the
license plate one is listed elsewhere, automatic license plate readers. So that, I think.
That's different.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so.
Well, and
I
the
think
auto
that's-
chalk is kind of a
Hybrid.
in between no man's land, so it's not.
So what's the device where it prints out the ticket and they put it on your windshield?
That's the new handheld. And the reason I brought that up is I was made aware by the parking enforcement people that they were extremely happy that they were being switched, like, within the last couple of months, from the old technology to this new technology, which was a lot faster, more efficient. You know, you type in the information, and it gives you everything you need to know, so you don't have to check another database. It's all linked in, and then it prints the ticket.
Yeah, and
That's the way I understood it.
we've had something for years that has done that. We're trying to upgrade the system, and it's taking a long time. But I think
Yeah.
both of those, old and new, probably qualify under what they're getting at here, but.
So you think that they would qualify because I think.
I mean,
we have
to me,
them in does
they would
not.
qualify as a parking ticket device. I think that's
Oh.
what they're going for in this, as an exclusion.
I would not
But it's
consider
not-
I
it
see.
surveillance. It just looks at an existing database and makes a decision.
Okay.
But it might be an issue of how is it ever used for surveillance purposes? Like, is the chalking license plate reader ever used retroactively, like in,
Well, and that is something
Yeah.
different than the handheld thing. That's a
Right.
whole nother system. You've probably seen it on the couple of the Jeeps with all the cameras and, but the handheld ones can take a picture and store a picture when they need to document evidence of the violation. And then that goes into the system as well.
Okay. Yeah, that is something we should think about.
but yeah, that, I mean, the question we should ask is it ever used
Right, right.
in the way, not just for writing a ticket, but for, is it ever used to just surveil cars parked on the street?
Yeah. Okay, another question, comment. And again, I only had a little bit of time with this, as all of you have. But 4.1.1, it talks about the chief technology officer and the city auditor, paren risk manager, question mark, shall conduct an annual review of surveillance technology. I find the idea of the risk manager doing it an interesting thought.
What community did you pull that from?
Seattle has their city auditor and their inspector general do the report. We don't have an inspector general. We're hiring for a city auditor. Herb told me that the head of IT is the chief information officer, not chief technology officer. So I would change that if you did want to use this idea. And this is from Seattle, if I didn't say that already.
So you said we're hiring for a city,
Yeah, the finance
Auditor?
department has an auditor position. And I believe it's in a hiring process right now.
and was that filled before?
Yes.
Okay. And so the question that you're posing here is, should it be the city auditor or the risk manager
Or someone else?
or someone else? But in Seattle, you said it's the city auditor. Is that right?
With the inspector
It's
general.
With the
Inspector
inspector
General.
general. Okay. Well, obviously, that's something to be discussed.
By Herb.
Bye, thank you.
Maybe it would be helpful if I just walked through what
Yeah, can
what
you
is
do
here.
that?
That'd be great.
And then we could dig in.
Are you gonna start at the beginning?
Yeah, we'll start at the beginning.
Thank you.
So what I did, you'll see throughout the document, we'll start at purpose. What I've done is try to find language and ideas that have either already been used by us or other cities. So in the purpose, the first clause says that the city has an interest in citywide surveillance, technology, and data management policy. That's straight from our resolution that's already been passed by council. I added language here that is in 2 other policies that talks about the need to balance public safety and privacy. Any questions on those 2? And then I go into the definitions. So this definitions, as we just described, comes from Nashville-Davidson County. And that mirrors the definition that the ACLU model policy has very, very, very closely. And I'd have to look to see if the other cities also use, how close their definitions are.
And what we use in the survey?
Oh, I'm sorry?
And what we use in the survey?
Yes, we use the Nashville definition in the survey.
So it's the same there? back and
Right.
forth. Okay, good.
I added 2 more definitions. We may need to add more definitions, and that's probably something that the city attorney will want to do as well. One on what is surveillance data. That's from Seattle. And what is a municipal entity? I thought that would help with clarity when we're talking about agencies and departments and divisions, to just call them entities. Some of this, especially language, will be reworked as an ordinance is developed by the attorney's office, but I thought for now that would be helpful.
So are you saying that 1I, 2 are things that the city attorney would be looking at
Well, what's,
under 1I and 1?
the idea here is that we will develop the policy ideas
Sure.
and then hand it to the city attorney. I'm assuming the city attorney will futz with the definitions quite a bit.
Okay.
Because they'll want the definitions to match other definitions in our ordinance, like municipal entity. We'll want to use consistent language.
So that would be under 2.
Yeah, but I could see that being altered. Any other questions on that section? Okay, so part 3 is about council approval and when it is required and how it is required. So the first part of this is that council approval is required whenever agencies are seeking funds, acquiring new technology, using surveillance technology, or entering into agreements with other entities to share equipment or data. That is present in 3 of the communities we've looked at. Somerville, Santa Clara, and Nashville all have that language.
And do they exclude other municipal entities or include? You have that as a question?
It's actually not fleshed out, and so that's why I added that. It's something to think about. Does the council need to have oversight whether if traffic engineering is sharing data with MPD?
Intercity.
Intra, rather than
Intra, yeah.
rather than
Right.
inter. I was thinking of like with the county.
No, because for me, that would be entering into agreement with another entity. So I'm asking, is it include municipal entities within the city and whether you want to do that or not? I mean, that would be getting to a level of granularity you may not want to do, but I just thought I'd raise the question.
I have a thought here, and, I see where you're going, and forgive me, but it sounds like you may be trying to recreate the wheel. Would it be better to look at this in terms of how the city does business for everything else, and say, if this was some other thing, how would we react to spending? Is there a threshold, or is there a policy for sharing information? Saying, how do we do this on other things, and could that be applied in a similar fashion, rather than saying this one area is unique and special and we have to start over from scratch? I mean, there are different policies that are similar, but they have different technologies. So do we need to for example, spending money, is there a threshold of, well, if it's below $25,000 or a certain dollar figure, you don't have to go to council if it's a discretionary fund, but if it's over something, you do. So does this mean that anything that has anything to do with technology, no matter what the dollar figure is, it has to come back to the council?
Yeah, I mean,
Or-
I think there's a reason why we're having this work group, and it's because the existing policies on purchasing and sharing aren't really yielding the kind of information that we would like to see as the public. So that we do need to, it's not reinventing the wheel, I think it's just being more specific about
And I think
this kind of policy.
The common denominator here is cameras. So it shouldn't matter whether or not it's
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Is
Surveillance.
what?
for surveillance.
Surveillance.
Surveillance,
Yeah.
yeah.
What, I mean, just to add to that question, that would be, I would think, if you wanted to do something like what you're asking, you could say, if you're seeking funds above $5,000 or whatever you wanted to do, you could add a financial threshold in this.
Well, that's what I'm saying is,
I see
are we
that.
going to look at surveillance totally unique to everything else the city does? I guess that's the point that I'm making, or are we going to use other rules that worked, or are we going to say maybe we should look at all the rules, that everything is suspect?
So, like you're saying, should we use the existing purchasing rules or contract rules?
I'm not necessarily
Or
saying
adapting
that,
them. Or
that we
adapting.
should use them, but should we use them as a base for
As
evaluation?
guidelines.
Or are we just going to use Seattle because it's Seattle or Nashville because it's Nashville?
But I think we are using Seattle or Nashville based off of their camera rules. It's not on other purchases or anything
surveillance
like
rules.
that.
Because those,
So
these
if
four
the city have
communities have.
something that has to do with cameras, then we can use that as a base, but we do not have that, and therefore we are using some other cities that have the same kind of,
Right.
yeah.
These are four model policies that focus their ordinance language on surveillance technology, and that's the framework they're using, yeah.
I think it's something that we should think about. My initial reaction is that this is really quite different than buying a lot of other things. I mean, what we're focusing on is, kind of civil liberties and weighing a variety of things here. And so it seems like that it's quite different than buying, desks or building a building. So, again, I think we should think about it, but my gut feeling is that it's pretty different than what the other purchasing kind of requirements cover.
Okay, Heather, so we were on 314.
Yep.
Is this something you'd like us to discuss more, whether we need to include specifically intra-agency agreements?
Yes, I was hope, that's why I included the question mark. I would love to get a decision on that.
I would say no.
I would say no, too. I don't think the council needs to approve
Yeah.
that.
So, but we need to be clear that it's intra-agency, but it's not with, like, the county, for example, because I think that would be included.
Yeah.
So the language, entering into an agreement with other entities to share equipment or data, does that meet your standard there?
Why don't we, you know how we changed the language in the survey to say, other external public or private organizations? Or how did that language?
Or non-city of Madison?
Right, non-City of Madison entities?
Mhm.
That would do it.
So would we need a separate agreement with every entity, private entity that has a private security system that the city might need to obtain video for public safety in the investigation of a crime?
That's a good question.
We haven't gotten to exceptions yet,
Yeah.
but that is where many of the communities address that question, and they said that in several cases, for the investigation or prosecution of a crime, these rules do not apply,
Right. Yeah.
basically.
So I would say that if we've got an ongoing agreement that we can access the cameras of X entity, then we would put it under this. But if it's for a specific crime investigation that we're seeking footage, then that would be under the exception.
That's the way the other communities are framing it. So later in this document, we can create such an exception. It's outlined, but we can add detail to what that looks like.
And I think we need to be clear about, is it a specific crime that's being investigated? Or is it an initiative of the police department? Is it a crime-fighting initiative of the police department somewhere to access cameras somewhere where a crime hasn't been committed yet, but it's something that they want to do, a preventative thing? Then I think we would need an agreement for that. But if it's an after-the-fact investigation, accessing, cameras of whatever, that would be the exception.
Mhm. That's how I'm reading the
Yeah.
other.
Does that make sense to you, Vic, or?
Well, I understand, yeah, what you're saying. I mean, I think that's problematic, because, I think the private entity, apartment complex, Quick Trip, whoever, that might be willing to work with us, as soon as we say, we need you to sign this, say, we're not interested. I mean, it's difficult enough for us to develop partnerships and get this cooperation with some of these entities that are often very, liability averse and risk averse, and any formality is going to be problematic.
So what kind of agreements do you have that?
Well, there's some apartment complexes that will allow us to access their cameras.
Do you have
There's,
anything
At
in
any
writing?
time?
Just
Yes.
generally?
Just generally?
yeah.
When you're not investigating a crime?
Well, our policy controls it that our people are only authorized to do it for a certain purpose if they're investigating a crime or a pattern of crimes or something like that. We don't have written agreements with those places.
But you can access it at any time?
Correct.
Sometimes you need a subpoena, as I recall.
Well, it varies. Some
Well,
places.
to compel them, you need a subpoena.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
places will not provide footage after the
Yeah.
fact without a subpoena. I mean, I don't want to maybe get in the weeds too much from our perspective until you get to the exceptions. I mean, I think,
Right.
because I'm just looking at this for the first time now, and there's a lot that is jumping out at me as very problematic, but I wait for the whole thing and wait to see if the exemptions qualify that. But I mean, based on the sharing issue, I could see that as a major problem too, because we'll have evidence that will come into our hands. It could be video evidence, could be something from the enterprise system that another police agency asks for an investigation or something that they're working on. And then I don't think we want to constrain our ability to work with another agency or provide them evidence that's going to enable them to fulfill their mission.
Another thing that we talked about at PSRC is that it was brought up that financial crimes may not show up for a while and they may not jump out at you. And somebody may discover something and then they want to go back to different places to watch the video of the ATMs. And that could be over time, and somebody might construe that as a fishing expedition rather than an investigation. So, that this is problematic in my view. as
So,
well.
but I think it might be helpful if we think of them separately. So I think what may help here is to add some detail about what we are considering an agreement, right? Is it a standing agreement with an apartment complex? Does that need to be codified in writing and approved by the council or not? And then I would encourage us to when we're talking about law enforcement exceptions for exigent circumstances to talk about that in that section of this document. So we could add detail to what kinds of agreements might require council approval here, if you like, but I don't think we should be too, because this is consistent in all 4 of the communities, that there are clear exemptions for law enforcement relating to crime. And we can detail that there, but we can, I think, be comfortable knowing that that is the standard for many other communities.
Any other or 4?
All of these communities, these 4 communities. I mean, I don't think that many communities have surveillance technology policies in their ordinances.
Yet.
Yet.
Yeah, we're all working on them.
But I was trying to run through what I had done, so why don't I continue that? We can come back to agreements and talk about fleshing that out. I'll make a note here that we may want to flesh this out. And then I'm editing this in real time if you want to watch the screen at any
It's too
point.
small. And too bright.
Yeah.
The room is too bright to read.
Okay. So we talked about under what circumstances or what types of events would require a council approval, and then the next section is about how the council would conduct an approval process, or how the city would conduct an approval process. So the most detailed and thorough process is Seattle's. If anyone doesn't have a copy of the Seattle chart, that was attached to last week, the last meeting we had. I also have a couple charts here if you need them. But basically, Seattle has several processes related to surveillance technology and oversight. One of their key processes is their approval process, but they also have impact reports. I did not include impact reports here because it is a big process, and only Seattle does it, and we can think about that, but it's not, it's a bigger process. So, but let's talk about this approval process. So a department, this is based on Seattle's framework, a department would submit a request for approval to the mayor and the council to initiate this process in writing.
Yeah,
That-
That's one note I had was add in writing, if that's what we're
It says that.
asking. Oh, right, yeah, I see it. Thank you.
Sure. The request should include a description of the technology, its capabilities, and info that it will generate, description of the purpose and proposed use of the technology, clear use and data management policy, including etc. Then the department is responsible for notifying the public on a website. So what Seattle has is they have a whole webpage dedicated to surveillance technology and communicating with the public. So they require that the department requesting approval for any surveillance use or agreement has to publicly notice the details of that information and request. Then the department, this may not be right for a city of our size, but I just want to explain how they do it there. Then the department conducts public engagement targeted at the affected communities. They require a public meeting with opportunities for written and oral comments. Then they require that the department incorporate those comments into their proposal. And then finally, in Seattle, the request goes to council. And then in Nashville has an interesting, Seattle did not have information about, well, I don't remember it standing out how the Seattle elected officials would weigh the decision, but Nashville lays it out. So I added that here. Nashville recommends that their board grants approval only upon the determination that the benefits to the citizens and residents of Nashville outweigh the costs, and that the proposal will safeguard civil liberties and civil rights, and that in the judgment of their board, that no alternative or lesser economic cost or impact upon civil rights or liberties would be as effective. So it's a really high standard for approval, which is something you may want to consider. And then the last section that I completed for the purposes of this meeting is review and accountability measures. So the first part of that is an annual report. You can see here that there's some valid questions about who in the city would do this report. It could be the chief information officer, it could be a city auditor, it could be an outside party, I don't know. We have to think about that. And really, the report is two things, in my opinion. In section 2A, you see that it's an inventory of current surveillance technology and policies. So later on in this document, it explains that policies are required for every technology. So it's a list of the technologies and policies in play. But then there's some real analysis being done here by a party that is not one of the departments. How has that surveillance technology been used and usage patterns? How is surveillance data being shared with other entities? How well is data management protocol, our data management protocols safeguarding individual information? How is surveillance technology imparted or impacted or could impact civil liberties, et cetera, including annual costs for the whole city. So that's not something that one department could do.
And do you know any more about how annual costs are defined? I mean, what that means?
So this is from the Seattle ordinance language. I can go and check.
Okay, I would be interested in knowing really what that includes.
So that's a framework that is largely from Seattle. And then enforcement, you see pop up in more of the ordinances. Let's see here. So the council has the authority. This is an amalgamation. This phrasing is something I put together from various parts, that the council will review the report and will issue recommendations to improve surveillance technology usage each year in response to the report. And I'm going to forget which, it's Santa Clara, was very specific. The council may, or their body of elected officials, may direct that the use of the technology is stopped, that they require a department modify its own surveillance use policy, or that the department needs to come back and answer concerns from the elected officials. That was unique. I didn't see that in many other places. I mean, Seattle certainly gives the council the authority to reject a proposal. I didn't see this in their annual reporting mechanism, the detail here. So, and then here are just a few odds and ends. They may have to be reordered when this is finally put together, but other enforcement mechanisms that are included in the Seattle policy are that the chief technology officer shall direct any city department out of compliance with the ordinance to cease use. That a person who is surveilled and injured by a violation of the ordinance may institute proceedings against the city. That's in more than one. That's in Seattle, and it's also in at least one other city ordinance. Departments may use existing technology as long as they comply with the ordinance. So just to be clear, you can use it. And in Seattle as well, the executive shall establish a process for determining whether technology is surveillance technology, which is probably a very important process.
5 and 6 seem kind of like in conflict.
I'm sorry, which one?
5 and 6 there. The executive and then the council.
Well, it's giving the
Is that kind
council
of veto power over
it's giving the
executive
council
decision?
oversight. So the mayor proposes a budget and the council chooses to accept or amend, modify.
So the executive says that it is, and then the council.
No, in fact,
Says-
if you read it closely, the executive is
Sets the
establishing a
process.
process to determine whether it's a surveillance technology. So it's going to either set up an internal working group or clarify the definition of surveillance technology or something, and then council has oversight about what
whether it
things-
is or isn't.
That's
that.
right.
Okay.
And so that is where I stopped getting into the details. So I wouldn't want to go any further than that tonight. But I can certainly take comments or edits and include them in the document here in any part of this this first half of the surveillance use policy.
I'd like to hear from Vic where all your concerns were. Just maybe not go in detail about them, but just which ones were like red flags for you.
Sure, well, the ones that just jumped out at me were mainly, so under 3, I guess 3I, triple I, about using surveillance technology, and so it's not clear to me if, what this law enforcement exemption will ultimately say or how that will impact that, but clearly I think, obviously, we have to be able to do what we're doing and can't be getting approval to, you know, do micro-level things. I mean, if we're introducing some new technology or some new concept, obviously that's something different as to put a camera here or do surveillance on a certain person or location. That really jumps out at me.
And so tell me again, Vic, where it is that you're referring?
It's under heading
Three.
3 about council approval required.
3I3.
3I3. Okay,
Uh,
got it.
I think, you know, for the seeking funds part, I would, you know, maybe think that there's some sort of exemption where if for some reason there's something that has to be done in short order or some, like particularly, I'm having a hard time thinking of what we might obtain through the 1033 program that would qualify as surveillance technology, but it might happen.
Is that a grant?
No,
No,
there-
it's
that's,
just-
and there's really the way that process works, there's no way to get prior approval. Things pop up in the inventory and you can ask for them, and then if the next day they're gonna be
okay.
gone.
Yeah.
And so some mechanism where if it's, there's a way to do a sort of reporting out to, if you didn't have time to get prior approval. My presumption is that also would not, or that we'll have some language that is only going to apply to new technology. I mean, so obviously, you know, this year we're adding squad cars, so we're buying another half dozen in-car videos.
Yeah.
And so do we need to go through a formal review process to buy 6 more of the arbitrator in-car video systems? And that can apply to a number of technologies. And then I would really want us to be very precise and really be careful about the other entity piece of this, sharing and accepting, whether it's the private sector, whether it's other police agencies, just because some of that stuff necessarily is going to entail some urgency, and we don't want to do things that are going to be disincentives for people working with us and cooperating with us. And then I know we've talked, or at least talked some about how are we going to deal with technologies or tools where there needs to be some sort of confidentiality, and is there going to be a mechanism to do some sort of process confidentially with the mayor's office or with council leadership or some committee that's formed to allow for some sort of oversight that isn't going to, you know, cause us to publicize things that are going to jeopardize public safety operations. So sorry, that was a lot right off the top of my head.
So
So it's just to clarify, sorry, to
Mhm,
wrap
that's
this
good.
up, your concerns are mostly about the council approval process? With
Well,
what?
just some of those
Yeah.
details and making sure that we're precise about what it is that is expected.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so we had talked about that the other cities do have the exemptions or exceptions or exigencies. And Heather, I don't see that we have those even listed in the not having reviewed yet. So is that something that you'll be adding to this?
It's in the bigger outline.
It's on the final page, page 6.
On the bottom of page 6?
No, on the top of page 6. Exemptions.
It's on the back page of the whole thing.
Okay, so we don't get into any detail on it then?
I haven't
Agencies?
gotten there yet.
Yeah, okay.
I just wanted to ask, so right now, currently, you have agreements with the town of Madison and Fitchburg, and I'm just gonna use those two.
UW, probably.
Okay, I'll use three, UW. Do you have a written agreement, or is it just that you share
In terms of
information?
information, yeah, I don't know that we have formal agreements with them, particularly on sharing data or sharing records. I mean, we would share
So it would
information for.
just be common courtesy with,
Well, yeah, if they asked us for something,
yeah.
we would try to help them, just like we would expect that they would help us.
So when you're talking about entities, are you talking about, and just removing the private sector for a minute, are you talking about with the other municipalities and police entities like the UW that you're concerned with? Or is that something that already happened, so?
You mean sharing something other than with other law enforcement agencies?
Well, I was thinking of sharing information that is vital to an incident versus just sharing.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly we're not, we're not gonna say, Town of Madison, we'll give you a login so you can access our city enterprise system or access our in-car video server. It all is to be request specific. And
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is that there is a courtesy when there is an incident of some kind to share information to solve that situation.
Yes.
So you're not concerned about that, you're concerned about the actual access to each other's data. I'm just trying to separate the two.
Well, I guess my concern is that as this is written, it might imply that council approval would be needed to do that
Okay.
sharing that you're discussing.
Okay, and when you say that you have agreements with some private entities, apartment complexes, et cetera, that you can look at their recordings at any time, what are the parameters for that? Is it as associated with an incident or a crime? Or is it just, let's see what's going on over there?
Well, it's addressed in our SOP that we can only access that or any other video for a legitimate law enforcement purpose. So it could be to investigate a particular crime. It might be if we have citizen complaints or information about patterns of crime in a parking
Okay.
lot or something, that we would monitor that. So
Okay.
those are the main circumstances.
Yeah, that clears that up a little bit, thanks.
So any other questions from the work group members?
I just wanted to follow up maybe with the surplus that you talked about, Vic. And so, can you describe that just a little bit more, what that is or how it works and whose surplus it is?
The
that we would-
1033?
1033 program.
Yeah,
It's typically stuff that's coming out of the military, and it varies. I mean, a lot of it is junk that comes into the system, but sometimes there's some pretty decent things. I mean, we've been able to get some pretty high value things through there at no cost to the city. But the way it works is it's just a web-based interface, and there's different parameters you can search for, but something will pop up, and then we can request it, and it has to go through an approval process because everybody else in the country is looking at the same list. And then somewhere in their home office, they decide who gets it. But it's the stuff that is when things get in there that are valuable and in good condition, they
Go
go,
right
because
away.
there's a lot of demand for them.
And so do we have any approval process to that at all now? I mean,
Well,
in
there's
terms
a,
of
there's a standing council resolution to allow
Yeah,
us
there's a
to
resolution.
take, accept things from the 1033 program, and there's a small annual subscription that we have to pay to be part of
So
it.
who is it with, presumably there's somebody then in the police department who is scanning this and who just presses the button, yes, we want this? Is there any approval process within the police department, or who's doing this?
Well, there's only a few people in the department that have access to the system, and
Uh-huh.
it would only be me who would approve us getting something.
Okay, okay. And do we ever get anything that's totally different than something that we've had before, or that we've purchased before? It could be something totally different?
Well, sometimes, not very often. I mean, we got the big vehicle that we're about to get rid of, which was.
So we're sending back.
Which was very unlike anything. Most of the things are consistent with other technologies that we have. It's just some of the things are big ticket cost items for us to try to purchase, and if they pop up in there, we want to take advantage of it, of the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember seeing anything, Heather, in the other policies. Do you remember seeing anything?
About accepting
About the- yeah, this-
equipment?
yeah.
Well, this is language I drew directly from a policy about in-kind or other donations. So there's nothing about an exception to like a rapid-fire donation system.
Yeah, that's
that-
what I was wondering.
Not,
Okay.
that, there is nothing that specific. We could add that.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Or you could also amend it to be a, in the case of a rapid-fire, no-cost donation, that then they could then go through the entire process after accepting the equipment. But before using it, if you wanted to do that.
But even after you enter, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Rebecca. Even after you enter into their system that you want it, you still have to have a resolution, a sponsor, and it still comes to,
There's a standing resolution to allow us to do it, so.
oh, a standing resolution, okay.
So it's, I mean, we keep an inventory. Most of the stuff is pretty mundane. It's nothing too exciting, but the way it pops up, it has to be acted on pretty quickly.
Okay.
So just curious, the return will be through the same interface, or what is the return process like with this vehicle that are you going to put it back into that interface and say, here it is, and then somebody else will?
Oh, for the armored vehicle?
Yeah, or
So
any
when-
items.
When we get something from them, depending on how it's classified, technically they retain ownership. So the vehicle, they have retained ownership, so we can't auction it or put it on eBay or anything. So we tell them that we're not going to use it anymore, and then they go to the next agency on the waiting list
Oh, okay.
for one. So it's going to go to another police department.
All right.
Okay, so we've gone through what Heather has provided with us thus far. And I think, it's good as a first run-through, getting acquainted to it. I don't think in any way we've approved or said this is the final version yet. There's still a bunch of questions and outstanding issues. But if for the next meeting, you could give us another couple pages, Heather? Filling out, I don't know if you can get to the entire remainder of this outline before our next meeting.
Sure. I
It's
guess.
really helpful, just
Yeah.
by the way, very helpful, thank you.
That's great. Yes, I'm happy to do that. I guess I would, if there are things folks see that they want to change now, that would also be very helpful, because this half will inform the second half.
Well, I mean, we've identified the issues with the 1033 process. I think we do need it does need to be addressed.
Do you want like a subsection there, in the case, and you want us to say maybe in the case of
A standing
1030
resolution or something.
Well, no, the standing resolution is there, but I think we need to be informed. And if we do, come up with a like a confidential process or a small subgroup of elected officials that are going to be dealing with this confidential issues, that could be a way to kind of fast track initial approval for something like that.
Or an after the fact, since they can give it back.
Or
basically.
an after the fact.
Yeah.
But if it's one of these like sensitive things,
Mhm.
right, because that might be like the initial contact, run it by that group of 3 or however many people it is. And then if it's not a confidential piece of equipment, then you do the after the fact. But then it's not an approval process, it's just a notification process after the
Well,
fact.
You could still
You
use
can
it as
send
an
it
approval
back.
process, because you also approve things like using surveillance technology.
Yeah.
So you could run through the entire process with the new technology before they use it. You could require that, I think, quite clearly in this framework, if you want to do that.
It seems a little awkward, though, if it's already been acquired. Like, what if it doesn't meet, what if there's no approval
Right,
to use it?
right.
Well, then they give it back and it goes to number 2 on the list. I wouldn't imagine that it
How
would
long does
happen
it
all day.
take usually before you claim the thing and you're awarded it, and then you get it?
From the click on the website to when they say you've got it is usually about 3 days. And then
To when it's actually in your possession?
to when they say you've
That
been
you
awarded
have it,
this.
yeah.
And then it's just the mechanics of having it shipped from wherever it is, and that varies depending on where it's coming from and how much it weighs. I mean,
So because of the nature of the things, these aren't necessarily items that are already in your capital acquisition plan.
correct.
They're just extras. So it's not something like a delay of a couple weeks of a month or a month, and using it is going to
Yeah, I'm not at all
negatively
concerned.
affect, yeah.
I'm not trying to view this as some workaround, and I'm just saying that we want to be able to ask for it and get it, and then we can say, hey, if we were trying to buy this, would you have approved it, or something along that. And if the decision is no, then it's not hard to send back, we just have to
Okay,
pay for
all
the
right.
shipping. So there's usually no urgency to use it.
Yeah.
It's just to request it.
And then, so would you like me to add, when I'm looking at the next section, the creation of an internal city work group that handles sensitive proposals? Is that,
Yeah, I think, yeah.
who would you think sits on that body?
Someone from finance, because they're buying it, right? So they're gonna know about it anyway. Someone from the mayor and someone from the council.
Mhm.
Someone from council leadership at least,
Yeah.
CCEC at least.
As a preliminary thought that we
Yeah,
can get
yeah.
in there and think about some more.
Okay. I wanted to, while I have you, when you look at the approval process, is it too big, too small, too long, too short, too detailed, not detailed enough? You know, do we want departments to have a public engagement meeting? You know, that's probably the most onerous part of it.
I'm just trying to picture how it works, you know, with the budget process and all of that.
Yeah, I don't feel ready to answer that question
don't
right
either.
now.
Sure, we
Yeah.
can think
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, this is good for a first draft and give us, when the whole thing is fleshed out, I think
Mhm.
we'll be able to have a bigger picture sense of how it's all gonna work and be able to evaluate that
Okay.
better. So one thing I would like to see, I don't know if you've been able to do it, but you gave us grids for each of the communities. If there's a way to really generalize and let us see a comparison of all of those things, again, in another chart, in like a meta chart, where we have the 4 communities and then really general headings. And they might be headings of, you know, headings from
From the outline.
the outline of the policy.
Okay.
That you can plug things into, because I still feel like I'd like to see all of that information in that specific framework.
Okay.
That it would just really help me evaluate, you know, why we're putting in some things and not others. With that, is that just me, or would you
No, I
all,
would love to have it. in
would that be helpful to you?
A table or something, so I can compare going across.
Yeah. So, and our next meeting is the blah, 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 13th? Friday the 13th, is that right? So that's a couple weeks. We ready to talk about next steps? Since I already started talking about next steps?
Yes.
Do we want more presentations? If so, what?
Metro.
And meeting schedule, okay, presentation. Metro?
Yeah, definitely Metro.
Mhm.
And any others, actually, that aren't on the enterprise camera system, I would like to hear from. So I don't know if water's on it or not. I'd like to hear from them. Or are all the parking utility cameras on that? If not, then maybe hear from them.
CDA?
Yes, right. To hear, you know, what cameras they have and how they use them.
Yeah, I think I would like to hear from Parks.
Parks also?
And actually, you know, I mean, we saw the traffic cameras, but to me, it would be helpful to know a little bit more about how they do use them.
So TE also?
Yeah. And I'd like to hear more about how the police use the cameras. I mean, we saw the traffic cameras, but we really didn't see the cameras that you use. But how do you use them? I mean, is it more proactive? If you could give some examples of how they have really been useful in some pretty, in my view, some pretty significant situations that the cameras have been, because I think it would be helpful to know that. And some instances of cooperating with other entities. Like I mentioned the UW, because I know that in some cases that has been done.
But
So-
I feel like what we're trying to get at, there's, cooperation in specific investigations and solving particular crimes. But then there's just the general level of cooperation, like
Right,
what's our
that's true.
relationship, MPD's relationship to the fusion center? What kind of information goes back and forth from
Mhm.
that? What's just the general, do you have equipment that you loan out generally? Not like, oh, we have this crime, we need this, but just generally, are there ongoing relationships with other entities where you have a sharing? So I think those are the things that
Yeah.
we would need city approval of. And that, I would like to hear more about what are the already existing kind of mutual aid relationships that are out there. Anything else, Paul? Any presentation you'd like to hear from
No.
anyone? No,
Not
you're
at this
good?
time. I'm eagerly awaiting the next draft.
Okay.
So what do you have on your list? TE,
TEPU, CDA, Parks, Metro,
what was the other one?
Parking Utility, CDA, Housing.
Oh, CDA, I
Yeah.
didn't hear that. Okay. And Metro.
And water, did we say water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If,
Yeah, I know that water has cameras just for safety
and we may not
For the,
need them if they're
Yeah.
on the enterprise
Right.
system,
Mhm.
because that seems pretty evident, kind of what they'd be using them for. Might be interesting to know who they, but we'll
Yeah.
get that
Yeah.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Good. So someone needs to make the motion.
I move
What do you move?
adjournment.
Thank you. Second. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.